This week on Christian World News, revival in Iran. The COVID-19 lockdown sends a surge of Iranians to the internet looking for alternatives to Islam.
Plus, China's crackdown on religion. Christians and Muslims are in the crosshairs as churches are torn down and millions of Muslims sent to labor camps.
And with persecution on the rise worldwide, believers are forced to flee their home countries. So why is America cutting back on the number of Christian refugees allowed into our country? Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Christian World News. I'm George Thomas.
And I'm Wendy Griffith. Glad to have you with us. Iran is experiencing an unexpected revival in the midst of COVID-19. Mohabbat TV sends the gospel message into Iran by TV and the internet. The ministry reports it is recording 10 times more online salvations than this time last year. That's 3,000 Iranians coming to Christ every month since March. The large number of people leaving Islam is causing a backlash against the church. Christians are being arrested there and imprisoned for responding to the gospel message.
Here to tell us more about all of this is Mike Ansari, Director of Operations for Mohabbat TV. So, Mike, tell us more about this unprecedented revival taking place in Iran in the midst of a global pandemic.
Since March of this year, most Iranians are practicing social distancing by staying at their homes. Government has increased their internet bandwidth to keep them at home. As a result, many young Iranians are going online to research alternatives to what their government offers. We have seen a tenfold increase in our online traffic coming from inside Iran to our chat and social media channels. We're registering around 3,000 personal decisions by Iranian Muslims to leave Islam for Christianity during this revival. That's why we call this a pandemic of hope.
What is fueling this unprecedented growth where you have 3,000 Iranians every month since March coming to Jesus Christ? What's fueling it?
People are not happy with their government. They're disillusioned with Islam. They want a regime change. They have been very vocal about this for years. We noticed last November and December that there was a huge uprising in Iran and it was crushed by Iranian government killing more than 1,500 of its citizens. Iranians have declared publicly that they don't want an Islamic Republic anymore. So they just don't trust their government.
What actions specifically, Mike, is the government taking to stop the revival from happening?
A short time ago, Iran's Guardian Council has asked for some amendments to be made to a proposed parliamentary bill that threatens to facilitate the further repression of religious minorities, such that those found guilty of what they call a deviant psychological manipulation or propaganda contrary to Islam, whether in real or virtual sphere. This is a major violation to people's right to freedom of expression and belief.
And obviously, the regime realizes the influence not just of satellite television, which you guys are broadcasting on primarily, but they also see social media. They see the various platforms. They're coming about with laws that will penalize those who leave Islam based on accepting Jesus Christ by watching an online program or going on social media, correct?
That is correct. Now, they basically made a law to be able to legally, according to their own statements, to go after anybody who is non-Islamic.
Tell us about Christians who have been arrested. I hear there have been a number of them since March, since the pandemic began. Tell us about their plight.
George, absolutely. Since a few months ago, we've seen a major increase in the number of raids on people's homes and house churches. Dozens of Christian converts have been arrested in the last few weeks and charged with acting against national security by promoting Zionist Christianity.
How can we pray for the church in Iran?
The church in Iran is fighting for its survival. First and foremost, we are asking the international community to pray for Iran's church. Under severe persecution from their own government, they're turning around and turning the other cheek and going on the streets of Iran and helping the people who are under distress over a pandemic. Second, to bring awareness to the plight of Iranian Christians at their churches. Third, at Heart for Iran and Mohabbat TV, we are providing resources to Iran's underground church. If you want to partner with us, do contact us on our website, heartforiran.com.
All right, terrific. Thank you so much for that update. Mike Ansari, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
At least 110 million children worldwide have gone hungry due to the COVID-19 pandemic. That's according to research in 24 nations by the Christian humanitarian aid group World Vision. The pandemic has pushed as many as 8 million children worldwide into child labor or begging for food and money. The United Nations projects 66 million more children will fall into extreme poverty. That's on top of the 385 million already living in that condition.
In the Philippines, the iconic jeepneys that usually run through the cities are sitting idle, as you can imagine, because passengers are staying home. The drivers are still on the streets, though, but not to drive, but to beg.
Oh, man. Some of their children are also out there asking for food, but they're also finding help from another source. CBN's Operation Blessing is helping families struggling to survive. Our Lucille Toulousan has this report from Manila.
While other kids are in the comfort of their homes during the COVID-19 pandemic, 11-year-old Cedi Sebastian is out in the streets begging for money to buy food.
I pity my father because he cannot work. We don't have food to eat. That's why I beg so we can have money to buy rice, food, and milk for my sister.
Cedi's father is among the thousands of jeepney drivers who are struggling financially after they lost their jobs when the Philippine government imposed a coronavirus lockdown in March.
It hurts to see my son begging, but I can't stop him. He tells me just to stand nearby so I can quickly come to him when the policeman tries to arrest him.
Although some routes have recently been opened, allowing 6,000 drivers to operate, this is only a small fraction of the more than 50,000 jeepneys that used to fill the streets of Metro Manila.
I have to keep my face mask on so that I will not get fined for $100. Behind me are the jobless jeepney drivers, and they have resorted to begging for food and money out here in the streets. Most of them have been evicted from their rented places because they don't have money to pay the rent. So now they have to endure the discomforts of living in the jeepney as their home.
We live here since the lockdown. It's very difficult, especially for our children. There's a lot of mosquitoes and it's very hot. I appeal to the authorities to open our routes so we can earn again because it's been 4 months now that we don't have income.
Like the rest of the drivers, Nilo Malibiran is frustrated over his family's miserable condition.
It is making me cry to see my family suffer. I want to buy them many things, but I don't have money. Our son got sick and I don't have money to buy his medicines and buy him milk. It's so frustrating.
To alleviate their suffering, Operation Blessing reached out to the jeepney drivers and gave them food bags that contained rice, canned goods, noodles, cereal, coffee, and other basic needs.
Thank you for everything you gave us. This is really a big help because we can't buy those things.
I am very happy with everything that Operation Blessing has given us. It's a lot. Now we have plenty of food to eat. I don't have to beg. Thank you so much.
A volunteer pastor of Operation Blessing gathered the jeepney drivers to share with them the message of salvation through Christ. He prayed for their faith to be strengthened as they wait for the day that they can drive their jeepneys in the streets again. Lucille Toulousan, CBN News, Manila.
Up next, it's one of the worst human rights abuses in modern history. In China, Muslims and Christians are targeted for their faith. That story when we come back.
I don't know if there has ever been a time when our nation and the world needed a miracle more than we do right now.
Get Pat Robertson's latest DVD, Do You Need a Miracle? In this DVD, you'll discover God's awesome power at work today, featuring incredible true stories of divine intervention.
God showed up and he worked miracles.
Different doctors would come in. It's like, wow, you're a miracle.
I knew God had restored him.
We've also gathered teachings that will be especially helpful to you with what we're facing today. Why it's so important to believe God and build our faith. And this program is going to help you do just that.
Conquer fear, find hope, and be encouraged. Get Do You Need a Miracle? Yours when you become a CBN partner. Call now, 1-800-700-7000, or go to cbn.com. Available now.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5, Wednesday night at 9:30. As the world watches from the outside,
it's a big diplomatic tug-of-war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
It's what starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline, Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Members of a communist group kidnapped and killed a pastor in India this week. Morning Star News reports the attack happened in Bhatpar village in Maharashtra state. Pastor Tato was preaching to about 15 families on his property when 3 armed men and 3 women walked in. They tied his hands and led him away. A few minutes later, a gunshot rang out and the pastor was dead. Local villagers reportedly complained about the number of people turning to Christ and incited the group to kill the pastor. It's horrible.
It is, sure is. International outrage is mounting against China's communist government. Beijing received global criticism for its mishandling of the COVID-19 crisis.
Now it's accused of launching a major crackdown against Christians and committing genocide against ethnic Muslims. Gary Lane has this alarming report.
Christians in China say the latest government crackdown against the church is worse than Chairman Mao's attacks during the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s. But why now? China aide President Bob Fu says this wave of persecution actually began in 2015. But now the Chinese Communist Party has a new excuse for targeting Christians.
Now, under this pretext of COVID-19 coronavirus, the Chinese Communist Party has intensified its persecution by banning all the church activities, even those services or worship or prayer meetings in believers' own homes with their own family members.
The government is also using this as an excuse to arrest Christians who call for online prayer meetings. CBN has reported on the removal of crosses from church buildings, and this month it picked up steam. On July 7th, more than 100 Public Security Bureau police and others were sent to oversee the demolition of crosses at Aodi Christian Church and Yangchang Christian Church in China's Zhejiang province. Security guards reportedly beat Christians who tried to stop the cross removals. Church members saying those injured included a man in his 80s, violently pushed to the ground. And on July 5th, police interrupted services at Guilin in Guang Church, arresting church elders. Hours later, church members sang hymns outside the 7-star Public Security Bureau station as they awaited the release of their leaders. Fu says it's all a part of a new campaign of sinicization, which means Christians are only considered to be good citizens if they adhere to communist ideology.
And ironically, Xi Jinping's portrait was even put on the church pulpit along with Chairman Mao. And the first line item of worship, by the government-sanctioned church before COVID-19 was to sing a Communist Party's national anthem.
And examples go beyond churches. In Fuzhou City, a Catholic family was forced out of their government-subsidized housing after they refused to remove religious icons from their home. And China's Religious Affairs Bureau has banned religious funeral ceremonies and preaching in funeral places. Meanwhile, Christians aren't the only ones suffering. Ethnic Uyghurs from East Turkestan, a region the communist government calls Xinjiang province, are under attack.
China is home to one of the worst human rights crises of our time. It is truly the stain of the century.
The U.S. Council on International Religious Freedom goes further, calling it genocide. For years, the Chinese government has forced Uyghur women to undergo abortions. Now, a new development. The president of East Turkestan's government in exile told me on the Global Lane that China is also conducting forced sterilization.
Hundreds of thousands of Uyghur and other Turkic women have been forcibly sterilized by the Chinese government. China has a long-standing policy of forcibly aborting Uyghur and other Turkic babies. In fact, according to the Chinese government, between 1979 and 2009, they prevented 3.7 million illegal births in East Turkestan.
Also, Hudayar and the U.S. Defense Department say as many as 3 million Uyghurs are being forcibly detained in re-education and forced labor camps.
Beijing described Xinjiang's internment camps as vocational training camps. New reports of forced abortions and sterilizations add to a body of evidence that contradicts that.
The U.S. State Department is alerting corporate CEOs and others about China's use of Uyghur slave labor so they won't become involved. The East Turkestan government in exile is taking its case to the International Criminal Court. But whether it is the persecution of Uyghurs or Christians, China's communist government is likely to ignore international outrage, describing it as foreign interference in Chinese internal affairs. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Coming up, the U.S. shuts its door to refugees as more and more Christians are seeking shelter from persecution in their home countries. Where will they go?
It's about the competition.
I kind of put that pressure on myself, and I think people had expectations.
It's about overcoming.
We use this phrase all the time, keep chopping, keep practicing hard.
It's about going the distance.
I think as a father, it's my job, to lead, just be the best husband and father I can be.
Watch Going the Distance with Sean Brown Saturday night at 7:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Orphans Promise is committed to loving and serving at-risk children, to helping keep families together, and to creating opportunities for strong and sustainable communities around the world. We're working in over 60 countries around the world, and with your help, we can do even more. There's an old African proverb I love that says, if you want to run fast, run alone. But if you want to run far, run together. At Orphans Promise, we want to run far so we can touch the lives of as many orphaned and vulnerable children as possible. But we don't want to go alone. We're out to change the world, one child, one family, one community at a time. Will you join us?
Discover the faithfulness of God in this timely DVD from Pat Robertson. Do you need a miracle? Watch true stories of people experiencing God's protection in amazing ways. Discover the immeasurable faithfulness of God to conquer fear and find hope in the midst of chaos. Build your faith and be encouraged. Get Do You Need a Miracle? Call now, 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com.
Good news for international college students attending school here in the U.S. The Trump administration agreed to rescind a directive that would have forced those on student visas to leave the country if their college only offered online courses. With many universities already doing away with classroom teaching, that meant thousands of students would have had to transfer schools or leave the U.S. Mark Papai is director of International Student Ministry for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. He told CBN News it's good news, not just for the international students, but for American students as well.
It's so important for them both as internationals to come here, but for us in America to be influenced by these global voices. They are some of the best people in the world, and we have a great opportunity to gain from them as well as give to them.
InterVarsity is on hundreds of college campuses, befriending and ministering to students of every ethnicity and culture.
In the midst of this unparalleled persecution that we're seeing around the world, many are seeking refuge here in the United States. New numbers, however, show they're not getting near the protection they had in previous years. That has advocates sounding an alarm. CBN's Jenna Browder reports.
The number of Christian refugees being allowed into the United States is down 90% from 2015. It is a major issue and one CBN News has been asking the Trump administration about consistently.
As it relates to persecuted Christians, do you see them as kind of a priority here?
Yes.
You do?
Yes, they've been horribly treated.
Just days after his inauguration, President Trump came out strong on the issue with CBN chief political analyst David Brody. But new numbers cited by Christian advocacy groups, World Relief and Open Doors USA show something different. This year, the administration cut the refugee ceiling to 18,000. That includes all Christians and non-Christians. The historic average is closer to 81,000. And in 2016, the Obama administration cap reached 110,000.
That means more folks that are trying to flee religious persecution aren't able to come into the United States. At least that's what some of the critics would say. What's the response to something like that?
You know, we're still the most generous, welcoming nation anywhere in the world. Our objective has been to try and do what those people really want in most cases, which is just to stay in their own country.
On the surface, that makes sense because no one wants to be driven out of their home nation. They would rather stay in their community with their families. But 80 million people are displaced right now. 260 million Christians are under persecution. And the numbers that we're talking about of refugees is a subset of that, 26 million. And those are people who had no choice but to flee their nation in order to find a safe place to simply survive.
Since the refugee resettlement program began 40 years ago, the U.S. has never taken in this few refugees. And while advocates say no White House has been stronger on religious freedom than this one, UN data shows when the U.S. limits refugees, other countries follow its lead. And the United States is no longer the leading harbor for refugees. In 2018, Canada took in 28,000 refugees, while only 22,000 came to the United States.
Thanks, Jenna. Well, COVID-19 is hitting Israel hard. We take you to Jerusalem when we come back.
From Washington, D.C., uncompromising stories, interviews, and analysis from veteran journalists David Brody.
That could be the next step in this escalating fight.
Jenna Browder.
Robert Mueller chose his words carefully.
Ben Kennedy.
He's asking Christians to get the word out.
Bringing you the political news that matters.
Get out and tell the story of the progress that we're making in this country.
Watch Faith Nation. Weeknights at 6 on the CBN News Channel. Nutrition, exercise, essential oils, weight loss, and more. It's Healthy Living with Lori Johnson.
Talk about what's in this.
Join CBN health reporter Lori Johnson to get the latest information from today's top health experts.
This is fantastic.
Find out what you need to know to live a healthier life. Watch Healthy Living, Tuesday night at 9:30.
I don't know if there has ever been a time when our nation and the world needed a miracle more than we do right now.
Get Pat Robertson's latest DVD, Do You Need a Miracle? In this DVD, you'll discover God's awesome power at work today, featuring incredible true stories of divine intervention.
God showed up and he worked miracles.
Different doctors would come in. It's like, wow, you're a miracle.
I knew God had restored him.
We've also gathered teachings that will be especially helpful to you with what we're facing today. Why it's so important to believe God and build our faith. And this program is going to help you do just that.
Conquer fear, find hope, and be encouraged. Get Do You Need a Miracle? Yours when you become a CBN partner. Call now, 1-800-700-7000, or go to cbn.com. Available now.
Welcome back to the show. Last week, Turkey's President Erdogan announced that the iconic Hagia Sophia would be turned into a mosque.
Now he's zeroed in on one of the holiest sites in Jerusalem. Our Emily Jones has that story and more from Israel.
Welcome to Jerusalem for this Inside Israel report, where we show you what's happening in Israel and the Middle East. Turkey recently announced that it is turning Istanbul's Hagia Sophia Museum into a mosque. Now President Erdogan has his sights set on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Erdogan said in an Arabic Facebook post that Hagia Sophia's conversion into a Muslim house of worship is a sign that Turkey will liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. This essentially means that Israel should be rejected from controlling Jerusalem's old city, where Al-Aqsa is located. Erdogan has a history of making anti-Israel statements and praising the Hamas terror group. Meanwhile, Christians everywhere are condemning Hagia Sophia's conversion.
For the Orthodox Church, Hagia Sophia is as important as St. Peter's Basilica in Rome for Catholics. The church was built in the 6th century and was devoted to Christ, the Savior. For us, it has been and will always remain the church devoted to Christ.
Hagia Sophia was the biggest church in Christendom before it was converted into a mosque more than 500 years ago. The founder of modern Turkey later transformed it into a museum. The second coronavirus wave has hit Israel like a tsunami, and the nation's leaders are struggling to cope. Daily cases have risen from just double digits to more than 1,700. The crisis has led to a shortage of the virus treatment drug remdesivir and a threat of a nationwide strike by the nurses' union, who say they are overworked. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the country is a step away from a total lockdown, sparking backlash from thousands of protesters.
We are not working already nearly 5 months, and unfortunately most of us have not received any compensations from the Israeli government, and this is really a tragedy. That's mean how you can feed your family and pay your employees after 5 months with zero income.
Some say Israelis refusing to wear face masks and social distancing are to blame for the second wave. Others blame chaotic infighting and mixed messages from the government. Israeli researchers at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and New York's Mount Sinai Medical Center say they've discovered an ordinary drug that can turn COVID-19 into a common cold. After 3 months of study, they said the virus prevents the routine burning of carbohydrates, which results in large amounts of fat accumulating inside lung cells. This creates the perfect conditions for the virus to replicate.
Once we found that out, we could start screening drugs that may potentially block the virus, not by targeting the virus itself, but by going after fat accumulation. So the virus needs this fat to grow and make new viruses, but a drug like fenofibrate can help the cells burn this fat, and then suddenly virus production stops.
The drug has been on the market for decades, and they say it can reduce the virus's ability to reproduce or even make it disappear. Clinical trials will begin soon. Thank you so much for joining us this week. For more stories like this, you can watch our Jerusalem Dateline program at cbnnews.com.
Thanks, Emily.
It's incredible. It's just a global pandemic that really has brought the entire world to a standstill.
Yeah.
Just about.
Pray for Israel.
That's right.
All right.
Well, folks, that's it for this week's edition of Christian World News.
Until next week, from all of us here, goodbye and God bless you.